What do movie theaters, restaurants, and special events in Laurel, Maryland have in common? They've always been good choices for date night throughout the generations. Join me as we'll explore some favorites, including what might have been the ultimate date night, the 1969 Laurel Pop Festival. I'm Richard Friend, and this is Lost Laurel. The Laurel Library might seem like an odd location choice to open an episode about date night, but there's a good reason. It was right here, quite a few years ago, that I first awkwardly asked the girl I liked out on what would be my very first date ever. Like so many other young Laurelites, we went to the movies, and that's still one of my fondest memories. That was certainly on my mind earlier this month when the time finally came for the demolition of the old Stanley Memorial Library to make way for a brand new, larger facility slated to open by 2017. The library may be the latest Laurel landmark to meet the proverbial wrecking ball, but it did outlive the much newer place I went to on that first date, Laurel Lake Cinema 8. Movie theaters, of course, have long been a date night staple in any town. In this episode, we'll be taking a look at a number of Laurel's date night favorites from years past. Opened in the mid-1980s, Laurel Lakes was Town Center at Laurel some 30 years before Town Center at Laurel existed, and the northern section was essentially an open-air mall, which included Laurel Lake Cinema 8. At the time, Laurel's newest and largest movie theater, it eventually expanded to a whopping 12 screens by the early 1990s, but by the end of the decade, one fatal flaw had doomed it. It was never designed to accommodate stadium seating, which would soon become standard in movie theaters everywhere. By 2002, plans were already in place to demolish the theater and this entire section of Laurel Lake Center, making way for a new Lowe's home improvement. The newest and largest movie theater in Laurel was, ironically, the first to disappear. Going back a bit further, Laurel had no shortage of movie theater options throughout the 60s, 70s, and 80s. The cinema at Laurel opened in 1966 at Laurel Shopping Center, and was viable for about the next 30 years until the new Laurel Lake Cinema became the hotter spot. Town Center Twin Cinemas opened in 1970, offering a simple 1-2 punch in South Laurel, but by the late 1980s it was forced to adapt to stay alive, becoming a 99-cent theater, showing only previously run features. Now that's a cheap date. Few things could top date night at a drive-in, and Laurel had one of those too. Wineland's Laurel Drive-In opened in 1966, just 1 month before, and right across the street from, the cinema at Laurel Shopping Center, but it only survived until 1984. However, Laurelites still had a drive-in just a few miles down the road, literally. The provocatively named Sidney Lust's Drive-In first opened in Beltsville in 1947. A massive wall overlooked Route 1, adorned with the theatrical masks of comedy and tragedy. This wall was actually the back of the screen itself. The theater had a planned capacity for 700 cars, but opened with space to accommodate 1,000. Lust sold the drive-in in 1976, and the new owners renamed it the Beltsville Drive-In. The drive-in closed in 1987, and the familiar Route 1 facade was eventually demolished. Laurel's oldest theater, appropriately named the Laurel Theater, opened on Main Street in 1929. It too was originally owned by Sidney Lust. Faced with the influx of newer, more modern venues by the 1970s, it famously announced "closed forever" in 1976. But that wasn't exactly true. Carlo Petrucci, who'd purchased the adjacent Pal Jack's Pizza in 1970, reopened the historic theater later that year with a showing of Jaws. However, the Petrucci family had bigger plans for the old building, and in 1977 opened Petrucci's Dinner Theater, the first of its kind in Laurel. Date night took on a whole new vibe as guests could enjoy fine Italian cuisine while watching live performances. Petrucci's closed in 1992, and the building went through a series of owners, becoming home to a number of comedy clubs. Despite some early appearances of future stars like Dave Chappelle, it never really took off. In 2014, the city of Laurel bought the vacant, decaying property and has been soliciting ideas from developers before making any decisions on its future. Let's hope someone decides to breathe new life into it once more and have Laurel's oldest movie house once again become Main Street's main attraction. Petrucci's Dinner Theater is the perfect segue into that other date night essential, food. Before or after any show, dinner is a must, and throughout the years there's been no shortage of restaurants in Laurel to meet any date night budget. But since we're already here on Main Street, and we've just mentioned the Petrucci family, our next stop has to be Pal Jack's. Pal Jack's Pizza at 310 Main Street originally opened as Bambino's Pizza in 1968, and before it was sold to Carlo Petrucci 2 years later, it was owned by another familiar name, Jack Delaney, who'd become better known for his Irish pizza pub in Montpelier. Don't worry, we're heading there next. Pal Jack wasn't just the name of the place, it was the phone number too, for those who had trouble remembering phone numbers. The pizza, which was arguably better than Delaney's according to some, was essentially the same recipe. Jack Delaney, meanwhile, shifted his attention to his new Irish pub, which opened in the summer of 1970. The combination pub and pizza parlor was, according to Delaney, not only a completely new concept in Prince George's County, but possibly the only Irish pizza parlor in the world. Despite his small stature, diminutive vaudeville star Sammy Ross would become a mainstay attraction at Delaney's for years, entertaining guests as Johnny O'Pal, a real-life leprechaun. Delaney expanded the bar and lounge in 1979 and added the area's only all-female Irish band, the Hags, as a regular attraction. Live local music would be a regular attraction throughout the pub's existence, making it an even hotter spot for date night. In the early 1980s, Delaney ran into some serious legal trouble and eventually sold the business. While his name no longer graced the pub, it continued to operate much as it always had. That is, until June of 2003, when the pub was destroyed by arson in what was determined to be an insurance fraud case. Sadly, it never reopened and remains one of Laurel's most missed restaurants. While the fire trucks are still out, let's hit another longtime favorite that went up in flames, Tags at 44 Washington Boulevard, just north of the intersection at Main Street. A kitchen fire erupted in the early 1990s, closing the popular Italian restaurant forever. Owned by the Tagliatella family for decades, Tags offered classic dining and drinks that drew loyal customers from areas well beyond Laurel. In a previous life, the building had also been home to the Mid-City Restaurant. Another site that's seen its share of various restaurants and fires is the current Paraiso Bar and Grill at 143 Bowie Road. Originally opening as the Village Inn Pizza Parlor in 1969, it's been a revolving door of ownership changes over the decades, with many of them being viable date night dinner spots. Bowie Street Marble Club in 1978, Molly McGee's Food and Beverage Emporium in 1979, Carmen's in 1981, Shakey's in 1983, Lindsay's Pizza and Buffet in 1986, and Captain Jerry's Crab House in 1993. Heading south down Route 197, also called Laurel Bowie Road, another longtime favorite dining spot was De Janeiro's. Located in the Town Center Shopping Center at Conti Road, it opened in 1973, boldly naming itself Laurel's finest restaurant. Known for its Italian cuisine and custom cocktails, De Janeiro's proved extremely popular throughout the 1970s and 80s and remained open until the early 2000s. Its close proximity to the Town Center Twin Cinemas, literally just a few doors down, undoubtedly raised its date night appeal. Laurel has seen its share of date-night entertainment over the decades, including a few notable performers at some unlikely venues, but nothing comes close to the two-day landmark concert that was held July 11th and 12th, 1969 at Laurel Racecourse. The Laurel Pop Festival was essentially a dress rehearsal for Woodstock, which was just 1 month later and featured the likes of Led Zeppelin, Frank Zappa, Johnny Winter, and more. I had a chance to visit the site with historian and Laurel Leader History Matters columnist Kevin Leonard, who recently wrote the definitive article on the concert, and Bruce Remer of erockworld.com, who was actually there that day in the summer of '69.
The late 1960s ushered in the era of music festivals, culminating with the granddaddy of them all, Woodstock, in August of 1969. But lost in the smoky haze of 1960s history is the fact that Laurel hosted a pop festival that was attended by 15,000 fans, offered an incredible lineup of some of the biggest performers at the time. In fact, 5 of the groups from the Laurel Pop Festival played at Woodstock the next month, and 7 of the performers are now in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. But the Laurel Pop Festival ended in controversy. Local media, especially the Baltimore Sun, ran numerous articles reporting on the progress of the festival. Exciting pop music is coming to Laurel Racecourse, stated one article in the Sun, which also discussed the acts scheduled to appear. It is estimated that their combined output of single and LP recordings exceeds 25 million. The day before the concert, the Laurel News Leader reported that advanced ticket sales have assured the success of the first Laurel Pop Festival, that features artists whose names read like a who's who in the world of pop music. The festival ran for 2 days, Friday and Saturday nights, July 11 and 12. Box seats were ridiculously expensive at $10. Reserve seats ranged from $4.75 to $6.75. The first night was kicked off by blues guitarist Buddy Guy, who was inducted in the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. He was followed by the gospel group the Edwin Hawkins Singers, who were enjoying huge success with their single, Oh Happy Day. The next act was Al Kooper, the ex-lead singer of Blood, Sweat and Tears. Jethro Tull, whose first album, Stand Up, released a few months earlier, was the #1 album in the UK, was next. They were followed by Johnny Winter, who would also perform the next month at Woodstock. Finishing the first night's set was the headliner, Hall of Fame group Led Zeppelin. Led Zeppelin was in the midst of their first worldwide tour and had been the opening act for The Who a month earlier at the brand new Merriweather Post Pavilion in Columbia. Bruce Remer was a high school student attending the Laurel Pop Festival. In those innocent days, he wandered backstage with no security in sight and mingled with the performers, snapping away with a Kodak Instamatic. So the lack of security back then made it easy for you and your friend to walk backstage during the Pop Festival.
We were just young kids, and we, saw people walking around the side of the stage, and Tom Beach had a small Instamatic camera. And we just kind of wandered around the side of the stage, went in the back, and all of a sudden we were right back there in these little tents where the artists were, and we were stood there talking to Jimmy Page and Johnny Winter. You can see these pictures on my website, and it was just fantastic for a couple of kids, and it gets you all excited about going to these concerts and taking pictures and everything.
Did anybody try to stop you at all?
No, nobody said a word. Nobody said a word to us. And then after, 20 minutes of that or so, we took some pictures and we went back out front and watched the show, which was incredible.
So what do you remember about Jethro Tull, for instance?
I think it was still the original guitar player, because the original guitar player left after the first tour or two. But, the main thing for us was seeing Johnny Winter, who was unbelievable, Led Zeppelin, and Jethro Tull. That was it. And they were all still young bands. They were still trying to make it. Led Zeppelin's first album was out. Their second album hadn't even come out yet. So this was an exciting time back then. All these bands were coming out of nowhere, and it was just, I always say that I was just lucky to be the right age at the right time in the right place to see all these concerts and everything. A month later we went to Woodstock, and we didn't know what Woodstock was going to be. We just went to see The Who and Hendrix. That was it. We didn't know it was going to turn into this Woodstock thing.
What do you remember about Led Zeppelin's performance?
It was incredible. Over here, the grandstand, we were facing the grandstand. The stage was facing out towards the woods over here, and they did the Lemon song, which is on their second album. And when he's screaming like, "Squeeze my lemon," it started echoing off the trees back here, and he was playing with it, you know. So I distinctly remember that. It was incredible. He was playing with the echo, and just the whole show was incredible. You know, these bands were still hungry and trying to make it.
I read in one of the reviews that the power went off very briefly during Zeppelin's set. Do you remember that?
I don't remember that at all. So if that happened, I don't remember.
Interview? The second night's lineup was just as impressive, but the night got off to a bad start. Rain delayed the performances for 2 hours, which meant the fans waited in a cold downpour. Finally, at 10 o'clock, the Jeff Beck group with Rod Stewart and Ronnie Wood took the stage. Beck, Stewart, and Wood are all Hall of Famers. The Jeff Beck group was on their 5th U.S. tour and scheduled to play at Woodstock, but the band broke up shortly after their performance at Laurel and canceled. The next act was 10 years after, another Woodstock performer, followed by the Guess Who, riding a huge popularity wave with their #1 single, These Eyes. They were followed by the Mothers of Invention with Frank Zappa, another member of the Hall of Fame. After Zappa, Hall of Fame group Sly and the Family Stone took the stage at 2 a.m. and brought the house down. Things went downhill as Sly's usual frenetic performance continued. The soaked fans were getting colder as nighttime wore on, and bonfires were started on the infield using the wooden folding chairs as fuel. Promoters issued several warnings to the crowd to no avail. The Sun described the chaotic end. The festival drew to an inglorious close as Sly and the Family Stone exited abruptly and the stagehands began clearing the stage. Someone heaved a chair at them and a girl shouted, "We ain't leaving." Because of the commotion on the infield and the rain delay, the Savoy Brown Band didn't perform. Baltimore and Washington TV stations characterized the bonfire as a riot the next day. Although the Laurel Pop Festival was envisioned to be a yearly event, the promoters told The Sun they wouldn't be back. They boasted, however, that the festival grossed $85,000 after paying those incredible acts a total of $55,000.
Date night dining didn't always have to be fancy. Diners and fast food have always been an option, and they've always been plentiful in Laurel. Even today, the signs of vintage date night dining can still be found. The oddly shaped AmeriCar dealership on Route 1 North was a quick shake in, and in the early 1950s, it was Laurel's original Tasty Freeze. Route 1 has been home to some classic American diners since the early 1930s. The Laurel Diner, which opened around 1934, originally faced Washington Boulevard. In 1951, it was replaced with a newer model, rotated 90 degrees south, and was situated directly between the new north and southbound lanes of Route 1. It's still open today as the Tasty Diner. In fact, they recently upgraded their classic tabletop jukebox system. Further north on Route 1, just before Whiskey Bottom Road, was Outriders Diner. Built in the late 1930s and only surviving for about 40 years, it was nonetheless a popular late-night dining spot in North Laurel. And any place that had Italian spaghetti, our specialty, in neon had to be worth a visit. Other small-scale favorites have included Tippy's, which is still in business today as Toucan Taco, and Laurel's original McDonald's at 833 Washington Boulevard, which became the Tasty Freeze in 1970. And sometimes the journey was the destination. Just cruising from anywhere including the Big T, Laurel Shopping Center, the mall, and the bowling alley was an ideal date night for many in Laurel. As far back as the 1920s, bowling has been a viable date night or any other time activity in Laurel. One of the earliest was this 4-lane bowling alley at Gray's Newsstand. The building sat at the 200 block of Main Street and was primarily a news and novelty shop, selling magazines, souvenirs, cigars, and candy. But just beyond that wooden door was indeed a bowling alley. Through the 1940s and 50s, the Laurel Bowl-Away, literally just around the corner at 132 Washington Boulevard, was the place to go. The building, home for the past 2 decades to Laurel Plumbing Supply, was recently vacated. While being remodeled, a few reminders of its earlier life were unearthed. Here's a wooden duck pin that's nearly 80 years old. In February 1961, just in time for Valentine's Day, Fairlane's Laurel opened its doors. The massive 32-lane facility split at 50-50, 16 lanes for duck pins and 16 lanes for 10-pin bowlers. Sometime around 1988, however, the duck pins disappeared in favor of an all 10-pin alley. Fairlanes itself disappeared in the early 90s as well. The bowling alley was rebranded under the AMF banner. Fears of the old bowling alley finally closing were at an all-time high in 2014, especially at the sight of what appeared to be pin setters being removed. In fact, they were actually being replaced by none other than a discarded set of duck pins from a College Park bowling alley. You heard correctly, Laurel once again has duck pin bowling. Not only that, but AMF has given the building a much-needed upgrade in appearance, one that includes an awesome retro color scheme with massive hand-painted lettering. Laurel has never had an amusement park per se, but for a week or two most springs, the Carnival would come to town. Located in various spots over the years, including behind the Tasty Freeze and in the parking lots of both Laurel Plaza and Laurel Center Mall, the Carnival could be a uniquely memorable date night, with rides you just knew weren't exactly 100% safe. Having been stuck at the top of the Ferris wheel myself in 1987, and having to climb down via hook and ladder, I can tell you that with certainty. But what's a date night without at least some degree of danger? Join me next time for a special episode of Lost Laurel, where we'll revisit the mysterious cold case that haunted the community for 30 years and the bizarre circumstances and coincidences that finally led to it being solved. Also, join me in person Thursday, July 9th at the Laurel Police Department for a presentation hosted by the Laurel Historical Society. It's part of The Rest of the Story, a series based on ripped from the headlines Laurel in the News. If you were a friend or coworker of Stefanie Watson's, or if you too were affected by this case, please join us for this special event.